Hey everyone, Mr. Weinland here with Chapter 7, going over geography, world geography. We're going into religion. We're going to briefly kind of go through this and talk about what's going on in faiths around the world. I wish I was in class to go over this. I usually do better when I'm on, in person with you guys. Just, I don't know. It's hard to do sometimes on a screen like this, but we're going to get through it. But it's still one of my favorite subjects, one of my favorite lessons to teach here in world geography. But before we get started, here are the questions for Chapter 7. We're going to go through these. If you want to pause to write them down and then answer them as we go, you can answer them on the Google form here afterwards, or you can email me the answers. According to Stoddard and Porak, what is religion? 2, in what ways does religion manifest itself? 3, what is the difference between monotheistic, polytheistic, and animistic religions? How old is Hinduism? Who is considered the founder of Buddhism? What is diaspora and Zionism? How many denominations are there in Christian faith? And what faith is considered the youngest in the world? So write these down, pause the video if you need to, and then we'll get started. All right, here we go. We're going to get started. We're going to go through this. It shouldn't take too long. Hopefully, I keep it under 25 minutes. What is religion and what role does it play in our culture? It plays a big part in our culture today. Again, these are cultural geographers, Stoddard and Porak. They basically list as religion is a system of beliefs and practices that attempts to order life in terms of culturally perceived ultimate priorities. We have to understand is that religion is a big part of our life. It has changed a lot of things in religion. A lot of things in culture because of our faith in religion. We've seen that a lot of languages, different rituals have come out of some of the practices of religion. We've seen a lot of changes, a lot of methods change over the years. We see in, like, for example, Christianity in culture, you saw that you kind of went from, a kind of a Jewish language of Aramaic, and you're dealing with also the Hebrews language, and then kind of transferring into Greek and using Greek and Latin as ways to continue to pass along the faith in many ways, and a lot of that has to do because the Israelites, or Jerusalem, was controlled by the Israelites, and then it was controlled by the Babylons, and then it was controlled by the Persians, and then and then we see then it was controlled again by the Israelites, and then controlled by the Romans. And so we've seen that Greek and Latin have passed into those cultures, and it has changed the writing styles of how they've gone and shared the faith over the years, and then which has been translated into other different languages, which has been what we know as different forms of translations today. But when we're talking about religion, it's mostly how should you behave. I mean, certain religions, they have moral codes, they have moral traditions, basically saying, "Hey, this is how you take communion. This is how you worship your God." So, for example, for a Christian, if you're a Christian, you depending on what denomination you go to, every denomination, every church is different about how they do communion. Some they do it in front of the pastor, some or their minister, some they come together and gather in groups to do it. Others they do it in the pulpit, where they're just basically sitting down and it's passed to us. So it kind of depends. So again, and also too in these types of religions, they're going to dictate or tell you in culture, like, this is okay, this is not okay, and it's going to kind of lead to a lot of your decision makings. When we look at religions, here's some of the religions that manifest itself and it manifests itself in many ways, but in mostly these three major ways. So here's your answer, I believe, to I want to say it's number two. Yes. So worship is one. Worship is a big deal, especially in many faiths, whether you're a Christian or Islamic, or whether you're Jewish. You're going to worship in many different ways. It's going to look differently. The prayer is going to look differently. If there's a song and dance or some sort of form of music, it's going to look different. So you're going to see that change. The prayers are different, obviously, like I just said, but rituals are different too. Marriages are different. Like we talked about when I showed the video explaining culture and explaining India's culture. There's a lot of Hindus in that culture, and in the Hindu culture, when it comes to the wedding, you remember gold was key. So if you're a very wealthy family and you're going to get married and you're sending your daughter off to get married, you are obligated to get gold for that ritual. And if you do not have a big enough amount of gold, there's kind of a shaming factor to it, and I know a lot of you are like, well, that's just wrong. That's just not right. I mean, gold is not that important. It's very materialistic. And true, you're not wrong. It's a very materialistic way of thinking, but that's also part of their faith and their religion, is that the material is a part of who they are. And then again, we've talked about the gold that they buy. There are certain days that you buy gold, and if you buy it on this certain day, you're going to reap the benefits from that particular god that you buy it for. They're going to give you good luck. A lot of faiths aren't like that, but in their faith, that is like that. So again, marriage, births, deaths, they are all unique and different. Adulthood is different. But we have seen over the time that we've seen a lot more worldly perspective. Secularism, the rise of secularism, its indifference or rejection of religion. We have seen that, and I will tell you this, sometimes secularism is too negative. We look at the secular world and we think worldly, and it's true in some ways, yes. It's very worldly, but also too, secularism is a way also to do some of these rituals like marriage, celebrating births, celebrating life in funeral form. Some of these rituals have been modified or put in a way to where everybody of faith and those that don't believe in a certain god or faith can still be a part of these rituals together. That's how I like to view as secularism, is that it's a form of tolerance and bringing people together. But yes, at some point in time, it is going to challenge certain faiths. So we move a little bit further. Let's look at the different type of faiths. We have to understand that there are three different types of faiths. This is one of your questions. There's monotheistic religion, single God. Example of this is Christianity, Islam, and Zoroastrianism. If you have me for world history, I would argue Zoroastrianism is not a monotheistic religion, but that's just my soapbox, and you have to take world history for me to get you to understand that. I don't have enough time to explain it here, but polytheistic religions is belief in many gods. So example of that is Hinduism. Another example of that would be like the Greeks, the old Greeks, not today's Greeks. Most Greeks are Greek Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox. It's a Christian denomination. But the old Greeks, the old Greek society, believing in the old Greek gods like Zeus, Athena. So that type of thinking. Animistic religions, animate objects possess spirits. So like trees, living trees, or Mother Earth, animals represent certain spirits. So the trees, the boulders, all have these different spirits, and there's different types of faiths like that. And again, if you need a pause to write the answers down, feel free to do that. I'm trying to move as fast as I can. There are different types of religion that's different from the descriptions of religions. There's different religions, but this is different types within these religions. Universalizing religions. Big big word there. It's actively seeking converts, believe that they offer universal appropriateness and appeal. things like Christianity, Islam, Buddhism. These are faiths that you do not have to be born into the faith to be a follower. I can go and as a Christian, you can go and approach certain individuals who are not Christian and say, hey, do you want to come to church with me? Or do you want to go to this event with me that my church is holding? Blah, 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 blah. And welcoming the individuals into the church and hopes that, that maybe they will become a follower. Same thing with Islam. It's the same way. Buddhism, they are actively seeking members to bring them into the faith. Ethnic religions, a little bit differently. You have to be born into the faith. Do not actively seek converts. Spatially located Judaism is the exception. So we're talking about a certain faiths that you have to be born into the faith, and that's that and a lot of this is going to be mostly cultural based, and so Judaism it's a little bit different. If you're an Orthodox Jew, yes, you do have to be born into the faith. If you're non-Orthodox, meaning that you're kind of not following the old school, they have a certain way of allowing you to become a part of the Jewish community, but mostly it comes through marriage, and there's a lot of different things about that. Um, but anyway, mostly you're not going to see a whole lot of ethnic religions. That's mostly going to be small types of faiths. We're going to jump quickly into some of these different faiths. We're going to talk about Hinduism. Hinduism is basically ranks third amongst Christianity and Islam as far as world religions, as far as size of members. It's about a 4,000 years old. It originated in the Indus River Valley. We do see this right around India and as well as Pakistan. We do also see the Ganges is a very sacred river. The idea of the Hindu faith is plays a big deal into their faith. The earth plays a big deal in their faith. Everything around them, the earth itself, the water, some of the animals are very sacred. And so the water itself is sacred. And there's a belief that once a year you make a pilgrimage to the Ganges, the sacred river, and then you go and you bathe in the river to free yourself of certain impurities, I guess, certain in some terms like a sin per se, but that's what a Hindu believes. There's a lot of ancient practices and certain rituals around bathing, and there's an idea of reincarnation as well, that they are trying to do what they can to honor their gods, and in hopes that they can come back in another life, hopefully as another person, maybe a sacred animal of some sort. This is a very polytheistic faith. They do believe in karma, so they do believe in if you do something bad, then something bad will happen to you. Okay, so here's a quick map of the world and the faiths. You can see here that pretty much all of North America and South America is Christian. Yes, there are little pockets in North America and maybe certain parts of Central and South America where you may find some Islam, or different types of traditional faiths, but most of it is going to be Christian. You see a lot of Roman Catholic, you see a lot of Protestant churches, and a few Eastern Orthodox churches as well. I do want to say though, when it comes to mostly America, we are definitely mostly a Protestant faith. You are seeing a lot of the Roman Catholic Church was the church for a very long time, and we're going to get into this a little bit. But over time, there was a split between the Roman Catholic Church, which created different pockets of Protestantism, and basically kind of another way of saying protesting against the Roman Catholic Church. And these Protestant churches created different denominations like Lutheranism. We see Calvinism, and over time now we have Methodists, we have Baptists, we have Assembly of God, we have Church of Christ. There's different types of denominations, and we're getting to the number a little bit later. But you can see here in Africa, up in the north, it's very Islamic. You have a lot more Christian churches in the south. Christian in Europe, and as parts of many parts of Russia and throughout, and you have Islam throughout this region of the world. India is kind of a mixture of some Hinduism, some Islam, and so some Buddhism, and we see China has Buddhism and different few faiths. So Buddhism, what we know about Buddhism is that its source is in India. It's splintered off of Hinduism 2,500 years ago. Uh, Siddhartha Gautama is the founder and better known as the Enlightened One or the Buddha. Perhaps the first prominent Indian religious leader to speak out against Hinduism caste system. You have to understand Hinduism is a caste system. Basically, the rich are valued very high. Then you have a middle class, and then you have the poor. And as we saw in the video of in India and the gold, you can tell there's a lot of poor people, and unfortunately, they do not get share some of the same benefits as those who have money. Buddhism pretty much started about 347 million inheritance through this time when it started 2,500 years ago. So we do see that it has changed over the years. Shintoism is in Japan, and basically we are talking about in Shintoism. It's basically mostly dealing with the emperor as the divine figure in their faith, and they also focus on nature and ancestral worship. Taoism, Le Tzu worshipped. He taught basically about his faith called the Book of Way, and mostly it's dealing with a proper form of rule, dealing with humanity and nature, pretty much living in harmony with nature. So Taoism is Confucianism. Confucius from 551 to 479 BCE. Basically, Confucius. I don't know if you call this really a religion, but it's more of like a philosophy. He kind of created 13 different texts focused on education 2,000 years ago in China. Really just encouraging the poor on how to live, and especially others how to live. And these texts kind of were ways of just helping the Chinese people kind of get a sense of their lives and what to expect. But under the communist China in 1949 to the present, Confucianism had been banned, and pretty much all religion is banned. I believe Christianity is trying to make its way into China, but it's very secretive. There's a lot of pockets, and you have to be very careful because if caught worshiping, you could be arrested. So the communist government has definitely changed. Judaism. Teachings of Abraham, going all the way back a long, long time ago. We do see that Abraham was one who lived in Ur in Mesopotamia. The belief is, if you do believe in Judaism, is that God chose Abraham to be the leader or the follower and create descendants, other followers to follow the God Yahweh. And basically, Abraham would create the descendants who would then create more children of God, who then would follow him. And then we see through time the Jews who had been in the land of Canaan that had been laid out for them, pushed them to Egypt. Eventually, they were forced into slavery, and then Moses was called upon by God to free the people, which he did, which led to Exodus, and then moving them back to the land of Canaan, which is then become Israel. And eventually, over time, King David would help rebuild the kingdom of God, at least on that earth. And then eventually, his descendants would kind of be kings, but eventually being torn apart, and then eventually leading down to the rule of Rome. There's two different forms. There's the Orthodox, which goes more with the old school laws, the Torah, the books of Moses. So basically, there is the Reformed, which does a little bit of what the a little bit of the ways of the law, but they have changed and kind of become a little more secular, not 100% secular, obviously, but kind of been more modernized. We do see that there are two main points or times in Judaism history. We've seen a diffusion of the Jews. Basically, what has happened over time is that the Jews have been scattered, and even when uh, after Abraham they were forced into Egypt, and then Moses brings them back into Israel, then they were um, we see that they were forced out again uh, by the sorry, Chaldeans, as we see that they were forced out again, the Israelites, and then they were able to come back as the Persians. But then eventually the Romans took over, and then they kicked out a lot of the Jews from Jerusalem, which is called diaspora, the scattering of the Jews after the Roman destruction of Jerusalem. So there's your answer to diaspora. Then there's Zionism, which was an ideology throughout much of following diaspora, that one day that we can bring the Jews back to Jerusalem. And this definitely got more popularized in the 1800s and the 19th century, especially after World War II, to bring the Jews back to Jerusalem and reestablish their home, which we have the country of Israel today, which reestablishes that land for God's certain people. Now, Christianity, it's the teachings of Jesus. If you're a follower of Christianity, you believe that Jesus is not only the Son of God sent on earth to save us from our sins, but as a believer, you would believe too that he was resurrected. He's still alive today as he ascended to heaven. But he came down here to not just teach us about what is expected of us, but also to share that his kingdom is not just of this earth, but it's of another world. And so that's what a lot of Christians believe. It is a split from Judaism. I think a lot of people forget that Jesus was a Jew. Now, you have to understand that when you see that with Paul, Peter, and his disciples, when Jesus leaves for he has ascended up into heaven. Basically, the disciples, they were Jewish too, and they were trying to approach other different Jewish individuals to follow Jesus. But eventually, what you saw a lot of other Jews go, yeah, we're not those type of people. We're not the ones that believe in Jesus. We're more of the old school, belief system, and so they tried to separate themselves because Paul and Peter and many of the disciples were trying to share this faith with all the Jews. But there were some Jews who did not want to follow Jesus. And so there was a separation and a way to call those Jews who follow Jesus. And that's where the term Christianity comes from, because we, as followers of Christianity, the followers of Christianity believe that Jesus was the Messiah, which means Christ. Or coming from the Greek word Christos. And so that's where the word comes from, Christ, Christians. So there's the tie-in. Over time, you see that the church would spread, and you would see that it would go not just stay here in this region of the world, but it would actually go into Europe and all through Africa. And at one time, we saw that four major churches played a big part in the history of Christianity. You had Alexandria, you had Israel, you had Constantinople, you had Rome. All together, these were the four major churches. Not to say that there weren't little churches here. There were pockets, obviously, small little churches, but these were the four major churches. And at one point in time, they were sharing information of like, hey, how are you teaching this lesson? What are you saying about this? What are you saying about that? Working all together. But as we're going to learn, a movement came in and wiped out these churches, known as Islam, controlling North Africa, just taking over Egypt and taking over Jerusalem. So that wiped out those churches, and only leaving two churches, which were here in Constantinople and Rome. And so we are at one point in time all Christians of the same faith, all of the same denomination. But eventually, this led into a split in 1054, which led to Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church, and eventually leading to Protestant Reformation. To be fair, here's what happened: I think it was Leo the Ninth, had basically tried to reform all the different churches around basically at the time of Europe and into parts of this region of Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire. And basically, he was telling bishops, like, hey, you got to do this or you're going to be excommunicated and blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to take corruption. I'm not going to deal with corruption. I'm not going to do, you're going to get reformed. Well, he goes to the bishop in Constantinople and he's like, you're going to do this because I feel like you're either you follow my rules or you follow this way or you're going to be excommunicated. And the bishop was like, fine, excommunicate me. We're done with you, and we're going to go ahead and create our own form of Christianity, which our own form of a denomination. And so what you see end up happening is this part, the old Eastern Roman Empire, becomes what is known as Greek Orthodox or Eastern Orthodox. And then the Western half of this part um, of Europe, especially Rome, becomes the Roman Catholic Church. So that's where we see the split and the creation of denominations. And then you have the Protestant Reformation, which also occurred as well during the time of the Renaissance. You saw that there was a disagreement with the Roman Catholic Church, going all the way back with Martin Luther, who basically, and here's the thing: he wrote this big document laying out all the problems going on with the Roman Catholic Church, but it wasn't like a, hey, I'm telling on you. It was more of a, I'm following the faith of being a Christian and I'm trying to hold you guys accountable because that's what I'm called to do as a Christian. And so that's what Martin Luther does, is he kind of holds his members accountable, but unfortunately they don't take it that way. And basically, he gets excommunicated. But Martin Luther decides, you know what? We're going to kind of create our own little faith, forming the Protestant Reformation, forming a change, and eventually leading to several denominations. And this is the reason why you have so many churches in Mannford. I know a lot of you are probably going, why do we have a Baptist church? Why do we have a Methodist church? Why do we have a Catholic church? Why do we have an Assembly of God? Why do we have a Church of Christ in our town? Why do we have a non-denominational? It's because of the Protestant Reformation. Protestant Reformation, basically Martin Luther setting off this chain of events of saying, like, look, I love the Roman Catholic Church. I'm just calling you guys out. And then they excommunicated him, and he's like, fine, we're just going to start our own church. And so we see that happening throughout the Christian faith. There are about 33,000 denominations. A lot of this goes all the way back to European colonialism. Again, the Pilgrims example are creating their own form of denomination as the Pilgrims left the Church of England to start their own church in the new Americas or the colonies. So we have seen Christianity very widely dispersed, as we saw in that first map. It is one of the major religions. The other is Islam. It is the youngest major religion to date. It is still very young, even though it's been several hundred years since its creation. The founder is Muhammad. He basically was a merchant who basically had, and again, this is if you are a believer of Islam. Just want to be clear. If you're a believer of Islam, this is what you believe. But he's a founder, and he basically was a merchant who then got the word of God. And then basically he was told, hey, you need to create this text known as the Quran. And then eventually we see that through the Quran, there's the 5 pillars of Islam, which basically lay out kind of how do you live your life and how do you play out your life or in society. And so a lot of these things are like, how do you give money to the poor? How do you go to church? How do you worship? How do you live your life. Fasting is a part of this. So these pillars are put in place to ensure that you are following the faith appropriately. Then we see over time after the death of Muhammad, we see kind of a denomination type split, but it's more complicated than that. The Shiite, Sunni, or different types of Muslims. And the best way to explain this is that after the death of Muhammad, people were trying to figure out, especially members of his family, who was going to be the next leader of the Islamic faith. And so a lot of his nephews were fighting over this, and which created Shiite and Sunni. So we see over time the diffusion of Islam is led out due to kings and armies spreading the faith across the Arabian Peninsula. Um, Islam is predominant in northern Sudan, while traditionally religions are predominant in the south. Islam is, we see that it is was spread by trade, but honestly, a lot of the faiths like Christianity, Judaism, Islam, they're all, and even some of the other ones are spread by trade. Trade is the best way to do it, is spreading information. 1.57 billion followers worldwide, fastest growing religion as well. And you can see where it started in Mecca here in Saudi Arabia, and then it kind of just made its way throughout the Middle East into Northern Africa and up into even parts of Europe. So Islam was a pretty fast growing religion. Then you have other types of religions. You have indigenous religions, local in scope, dealing with nature, passed down through tribes. Shamanism, it's more a community faith. There's a shaman, kind of like a doctor who is part of the faith. We have seen, though, a rise of secularism in in our society. There's basically a rejection of religion and faith. And honestly, I would have to say that religion is not always sometimes going to be faith based. In my opinion, we all have religion. Um, I think that we all have a certain belief system, a certain value that we follow, and based on those beliefs and values, that is your form of religion. Now, do you follow a formal religion of, kind of a formal church-based religion or faith-based religion? Then that's where we're talking about with secularism, but that's the rejection of that form of religion, not what you believe so much, but what others believe, and rejecting their faith in a higher being. So basically, we have seen a rise of that has grown throughout the world and become a part of not just here, but mostly in Europe. You're seeing that a lot of churches are shutting down or being turned into museums because the membership is down, and not as many people are going to church. And so we're seeing a lot of also anti-religious ideologies happening in Europe. The rise of secularism and atheism is part of that. And I would have to say, like, look, I'm not against anybody being an atheist, but to they have a form of faith in some ways, and that's kind of what certain experts believe as well. So how is religion seen on the cultural landscape? We'll quickly go through this. Sacred sites, obviously, certain places that have meaning. So like a church, it may be a certain spot. Like, for example, the knowing where Jesus was crucified, that's a sacred spot. If in certain parts of Jerusalem, there's a lot of sacred parts. A mosque, a church, those are sacred in some aspects. Pilgrimage is also basically individuals making a trip to these sacred areas for a certain ritual or practice their faith. We'll have a lot of sacred sites in Jerusalem, the sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. The Wailing Wall, the Temple Mount, the Dome of the Rock. These are places that all have meaning to the Jewish and Islamic and Christian communities. So here's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, sacred to Christians who believe in the site where maybe Jesus rose from the dead. So that they build a church right around on this site. Now, there's the landscape of Hinduism and Buddhism. Hinduism, temples and shrines. There are holy animals, ritual bathing places. To Buddhism, there's the enlightened tree. So There's also Buddha. The Enlightenment Retreat is where the Buddha and many Buddhists go for pilgrimages. There's different bell-shaped structures called stupas that are part of their burial grounds. So these are very sacred to them as well. We have seen landscapes on the Christian, as far as Christianity goes, medieval Europe, you see a lot of cathedrals, a lot of different churches, places of worship. We see religious landscapes in the United States. Now, this is where the Zelensky map comes in. We see that depending on where you're at in the United States, you're going to see a different type of denomination of Christian faith. So, like in the New England area, you see Catholicism. In the South, you're going to see a lot of Baptists, some Methodists. Methodists and Baptists, I think, are pretty close, but definitely a lot more Baptists. Upper Midwest, Lutheran. You see Southwest Spanish Catholic, West Midlands, no denomination. So, and here's the map that he created, and you can see here. Let's go here in the top of the green. You have Catholic here, and then in the orange you have kind of a bit of a mix. And then you see little pockets of Catholic here. And then you see Pennsylvania, a lot of Lutheran. Also Lutheran is going to be spread out also in certain parts as well. Upper Midwest, you see a lot of Lutheran type churches here. The Southern, a lot of Baptists, but there's some Methodists as well. There's still a lot of Methodists. I would say mostly it's probably 60% Baptist, maybe 40% Methodist. There's a lot more Methodists than represented on this map. Then we see the different mix here in Florida. Definitely a lot of Catholic down here, right here in Miami area. French Catholic here in New Orleans and Louisiana. And then you see Spanish Catholic in these regions, part of Texas. Probably it's gotten even a little bit closer up here in the Dallas area and even Arizona. So you see that. Then the Mormon Church as well. As some may argue that they are not Christian, some argue that they are, but that's a different debate for another day. But you've seen Western, you have a lot of mix as well. So non-denominational, I would say, is very heavy here in these areas in California and Oregon and Washington. We are seeing, though, non-denominational pop up just about here in the Bible Belt as well. So it's a growing trend in Christian faith, non-denominational. We see landscapes of Islam. It's grown, and it was in Cordoba, Spain. At one point, the Moors had controlled Spain, Islamic faith there until they were kicked out into the northern Africa. We do see that on their landscapes we have when it comes to their mosques, the mosques are the kind of the landscape. As you'll see, a lot of mosques that have been turned into Christian chapels in Spain. But there are certain mosques, obviously, that are still there, and there's certain mosques around the world that are devoted to Islam. But in a mosque, there's prohibition against depicting the human form. A lot of calligraphy, a lot of geometric design. The Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, where they believe that is where Muhammad is from, and also where he ascended up into heaven. So that is a big part of their faith, is making the pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia. And this is where they have this big, massive temple and or mosque, I should say, and they're where they go to worship during this time. We do see in conflicts, you have interfaith boundaries between the world's major faiths. You see this happening in Christian Muslim boundaries in Africa. Intra-faith boundaries within single major faith. Christian Protestants and Catholics like Northern Ireland, Sunni, Shiites. There's conflict, obviously, in Israel, in the West Bank, over Islam and Judaism. So that has been a bit of an issue as well. We do see Israel and Palestine have had conflict. Nigeria has had conflict with Muslim North and the Christian South. Yugoslavia with Roman and Eastern Orthodox. Northern Ireland, Catholics and Protestants. And so you see here in Northern Ireland, there's huge conflicts for many years that have caused death and because of violence. And, luckily the violence has gone down. It's not what it used to be like in the late 60s and 70s and into the 80s. but it was pretty violent in Northern Ireland, and it goes all the way back to the UK controlling this part of Ireland and basically bring in the Protestant Church, the Church of England. So, but so we do have fundamentalism and extremism. Religious fundamentalism is non-negotiable and uncompromising beliefs. So basically, it's not necessarily negative. It's just, like this is what we believe, and we're going to hold to it. We're going to dig our heels on these things. And sometimes fundamentalists are viewed as negative, and sometimes I feel like the fundamentalism is necessary. It just kind of depends on what's going on, and a lot of times society dictates what's too fundamentalist and what's not. Extremism this is where things can get dangerous. This is where I think this is where religion gets criticized. Is where fundamentalism is carried to the point of violence. I mean, you can be a fundamentalist without being violent. You can just, I mean, we're all in some ways fundamentalists when we hold to our beliefs. I may say that, look, I hate broccoli, which actually I love broccoli. But you may say it is the greatest vegetable of all. And I may try to tell you it is not, but you're just not going to let go of broccoli. And that's fine. That's okay. But where you turn to beating me up because I say I think broccoli is not the best vegetable, that's where it becomes extreme. And that's where it becomes a problem. And that's usually what has happened, especially in the case of Northern Ireland, is where we have seen extremists. We have seen individuals take their level of fundamentalism too far and have hurt others with violence. And so this can be a problem, and it is still an issue today, and we've seen it play out throughout society in many different factions. So we've seen this happen in the Catholic movement, the Protestant movement. We've seen this in Judaism. We've seen this in Islam. So it is kind of a problem with faith sometimes, is that you do have extremists out there. But that is going to do it for the lesson. Just know that, look, faith is, it's up to you. You have to find your own truth. We all have our own beliefs, our own different ways of valuing the world or viewing the world. So some value it and view it differently. So just respect others. Please don't be disrespectful. That's kind of the lesson I kind of have to say. Make sure that you've answered the questions on the Google form, and be sure to do your best to email me if you need to at weinlandp@mannford.k12.ok.us. See you guys. See you for chapter 8.